In 2008, Gary, Kirsten, and I found ourselves sitting in the front of an aeroplane, flying over to India to coach the Indian national cricket team, one of the biggest brands in world sport. The strange thing about this was, although Gary had played 11 years of international cricket for South Africa, he had never coached a team in his life, not even a school's under-9 team. And my role as physical and mental conditioning and strategic leadership coach, apart from being a mouthful, didn't exist in cricket. So there we were, 2 novices flying over to India, planning some lofty goals. We wanted to take India to the #1 team in the world in the 5-day version of the game, a position they'd never previously accomplished, and to win the World Cup, something they hadn't done in 28 years. The team we'd be inheriting already had India's best cricketers. They had the best data, the best technology, and some of the best strategies courtesy of their previous coach. However, the results they were delivering fell well below international standard. So in order to take this team to the top of the world, we needed to do something new or different with those same players. One important clue was that the players mentioned, or rather complained, that the previous coach had used very much of an authoritarian command and control coaching style. This worked for about 200 years of the industrial age, where leaders in business or sports coaches rose to that position by virtue of their superior knowledge. Being the most intelligent person in the front of the room, they would lead by telling others what to do. And up till about 20 years ago, most people were happy to receive and then follow instruction from someone who knew better. This is no longer the case. Courtesy of the internet, which has ushered in the knowledge age, expertise has gone from that leader's head down onto the World Wide Web and is now available to everybody with a device connected to it. Leaders, coaches, managers, teachers, even parents are being asked to upgrade their approach from downloading information onto others to harnessing the intelligence that sits within. Gary and I knew that the knowledge and expertise to take these Indian cricketers to the top of the world already existed within the group. We just needed to find a way to harness the intelligence and maybe make the odd adjustment. We would not arrive and tell people what to do. We would ask, and together we'd figure it out. One of our main rule of thumbs was that the more players spoke and the more us coaches listened, the more the team intelligence would grow. We wanted game smarts to sit on the field at least as much as it did on the coaching bench. For the first time in international cricket, we introduced the concept of optional practices, which invited players to decide for themselves whether it would serve their game in preparation best by staying back in the air-conditioned hotel and maybe having a massage, for example, or to come to training, their 100th training session of that season in 40-degree heat and 95% in humidity in Chennai. And if they did come to training, we would ask them what part of their game they wanted to work on and how they wished to do so. Traditionally, and still today, most sports coaches assume responsibility for deciding what each player will do at training, which I believe is a fundamentally flawed approach. Team intelligence grew to the extent that the night before the biggest game of these players' lives, at the pre-game strategy meeting, no coach attended. The 15 players were tasked with discussing only one question: what's really important for tomorrow's game against Australia? We informed players they were not required to tell coaches what they discussed, and coaches were to not ask players. It was their conversation which they were to own. The following day, India went on to comprehensively beat Australia and to advance to the semi-final and then the final. To this day, neither Gary or I know what the players spoke about in that 55-minute-long meeting. By the end of our tenure, soon after the World Cup, the Indian team was the #1 team in the world in the 5-day version of the game, and we were World Cup champions, which really was awesome. But I'm not going to stand here and use the science of hindsight to explain how good we were. It's an open secret that we had some of the very best cricketers to work with, And all that was required was for us to extract the potential that sat with each individual and the team. So this approach of harnessing intelligence of a very experienced team worked. But the question is, would it work for younger and less experienced players? I would soon get to find out. Some months later, I received a phone call from one of those same Indian cricketers by the name of Rahul Dravid, who was captain of one of the 8 Indian Premier League or IPL teams, which is one of the richest and most watched sports tournaments in the world. The team Rahul was captain of, the Rajasthan Royals, had spent the last 4 years at the bottom of the log. The main reason was that each team was given about $13 million salary cap to buy players in the player auction. The owners of this team only gave them half of that, and they kept the other half back to run the franchise. As a result, in the auction, they just did not have the money to bid for the big-name, expensive players. They had to resort to a strategy of finding young talent that came cheap. And thus, they earned their tag as underdogs and their position near the bottom of the log. Rahul convinced the owners to put me on the short list for the head coach job alongside 3 other proper cricket coaches. And I say this because I'd never coached a team in my life. I'd never played the game at any notable level. And if I were to be honest, my knowledge of the game, of certainly the technical side of the game, is probably just good enough to coach a decent schools team. So by any conventional measure, I was woefully unqualified to coach a professional cricket team. One of the interviewers happened to be Sir Clive Woodward, who was the head coach of the 2003 England World Cup rugby winning team. And his question to me was, "So Paddy, I believe you're not actually a cricket coach," which is not a great question to get an interview for a coaching job. And I said, yes, I haven't coached a team. And he said, "I'm interested to know, so you're obviously going to get an expertise you don't have. You're going to get a batting coach and a bowling coach and maybe a fielding coach, all of whom will be more experienced than you in the cricket coaching world. And I'm interested, how do you see the dynamic playing out of you as an inexperienced coach leading more experienced coaches, and how will you manage that dynamic?" My answer was, there will be no dynamic. Because if you offer me the job, my prerequisite before accepting it is I want no batting coach, no bowling coach, no fielding coach, and no fitness trainer. I want no experts on my support staff. And the interview panel is about as noisy as you are now. And one of the interviewers said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "You're going to give me 25 players who come from 5 different countries. They play under 25 different coaches in this year alone, each who have their understanding of how to play T20 cricket. They will have played under more than 25 different captains, and between them will have over 1,000 games experience. That's the expertise I'm going to use to build the entire campaign." I think one of the main reasons I got the job, I can imagine the chief accountant in the interview making notes, like no batting coach, no bowling coach, no fielding coach, no fitness trainer. He saves on 4 salaries. Give that guy from Cape Town the job. And he's not even a proper coach, so we don't even have to pay him properly. So I'd like to share a brief, very simple and practical framework that I used to harness the intelligence of this young team of players. It's universally applicable, so I invite you to translate it for its relevance back into your context. In order for an athlete, or any person for that matter, to learn, we first need to play the game or execute a task. In order to learn from that, we then need to review that performance, understanding what worked and what didn't. In amateur sport, this is done by a coach giving the debrief in the change room immediately after the game, maybe the overzealous dad running a coaching workshop in the car on the way home. And in professional sport, we do it by a Monday morning video analysis meeting. Once we've extracted the lessons from the past event, we then look to the next event and we come up with plans or a strategy of how we can perform even better next time. In sport, we then take those plans into practice or training. In business, this might constitute running a pilot project or having a discussion group. And once we've got those plans in place, we then take it into the next game and we execute according to those. And then we go again. The more times we go around this learning cycle, the more experienced we become. What happens, unfortunately, in the majority of team sports today and in many businesses is this learning cycle is broken in half, in that the practicing and the executing is the doing functions of the learning cycle, which is the responsibility of the players, and the review and the planning are the thinking functions of the learning cycle, which is traditionally the responsibility of the coach. As a coach, I could only review and plan. I would never get to practice or walk onto the field and play. The problem with this divided learning cycle is that game intelligence sits on the coaching bench, necessitating coaches, particularly in those important moments of the game, to send messages on with a water boy or shout instructions from the sideline. I plan to remove this break in the learning cycle and engage these young players in the reviewing, planning, and decision-making aspects of their performance. I wanted playing intelligence to sit on the field. So in the post-match review meetings, I would invite players to share their experience of the game as it unfolded. Initially, they were hesitant because they had never been asked to speak in these meetings. But the more they felt comfortable and the more they shared, the more the team intelligence grew. This is an actual picture of a team meeting. In the pre-match planning meetings, I would ask players to do the majority of the speaking themselves. I would, in fact, invite all coaches, even down to under 9 level, to do less telling and more asking in these meetings. I've already discussed why we had optional practices with the Indian team. With this team, I wanted players to take responsibility for their preparation, what they needed to do to give themselves the best possible chance of success. And all of this would translate to having intelligent decision makers on the field during game time. At the very first match of the season, I would ask the youngest and least experienced player to please lead the pre-game motivational team talk. And with each new game, I would get a different player to lead this, which is traditionally given by the captain and sometimes the coach. The message I wanted to send was that everybody's contribution is equally valuable. The runs, wickets, or points scored by a senior player and the junior most player all count the same. By the end of that very first 8-week season, this bottom of the log team of largely peer-coached individuals went on to make the IPL finals, we made the Champions League finals, and we set the record that still stands today of the longest home run winning streak, where we won 13 out of 13 home games. By now, I'd figured this coaching thing out. Next, I was asked to be coach of one of the teams in the inaugural Pakistan Super League, and then this happened. We came last. And in the second year, in 2017, we came last again. 4 teams made it to the playoffs, and only 1 team went home. That was us. In hindsight, I'd asked these players to make way too big a leap, too quickly, from the instruction-based environment they were used to one where they were asked to make many of the decisions themselves. My rather painful lesson was that sometimes, or most times, when we make big changes, they need to be done in smaller steps. I got fired, losing the job, but I didn't lose the lesson. The Sydney Thunder team in the Australian Big Bash League, Australia's premier T20 tournament, had lost 21 out of 22 games in their first 3 seasons. Down and out, they're down under, and with nothing to lose, I was given the head coach gig alongside Captain Mike Hussey. The first thing we did was release the superstars who were known to be disruptive. We then created a brains trust of senior, middle management, and junior players who made the majority of the decisions. And that team went on the very next season to become Big Bash League champions. Fortunately, more and more teams these days are using or adopting this approach of harnessing collective intelligence of the team, of having players doing more speaking and coaches doing more listening. On the flight home to rejoin my family after that trip, I reflected on the fact that sport is just a game. It's really not a matter of life and death. I have a 15-year-old daughter, And just like a team approaching an important moment in a tournament, a key moment in her and her friend's game of life is likely to happen on a Friday night at about 11:30 at a party, possibly after a few drinks, when some older kids try and coerce them to try something they brought along in a little plastic packet. There is no opportunity for me here to send messages on with a water boy or shout instructions from the sideline. Don't do it. This is their key moment when their decision is really going to count. How smart are we being, nurturing those in our care to make intelligent decisions when it's important? If in doubt, don't tell, ask. Thank you.